Of all animated Disney films, this box office clunker, which critics panned as little more than a television cartoon, has the most sincerity of its era. In telling a relatable story set in a modern period, a Goofy movie gained the audience love, and for good reason. Having not seen it since elementary school, when I rewatched it recently, and then again, I was impressed. The more you break it down, the more you can see the cohesion between every scene, the efficiency with which the film develops character moments, and the well-earned payoffs for each decision characters make. In many sequences, comedic bits flow freely, either through the modest slapstick mostly relegated to Goofy, with a surprising amount arising from some absolute physical abuse by Pete, or by simply letting these exaggerated cartoon characters interact with their world.
These characters are really appealing because they're kind of a comical view of what people are really like.
It's a world alive with observational humor at each vividly drawn subsetting location and in their lively backgrounds. Often, there's humorous things going on in the background that you might miss on a first watch through. Everything feels so necessarily intentional in the smooth 2D animations, which enable very precise facial expressions. In that vein, so does every line of dialogue come across as well crafted, and given the thought to adequately portray these characters while not squandering any time. The movie's music, especially the Powerline songs, have really grown on me, and most of the numbers push their scenes forward by saying something about the singers or setting up plot details. Notably, the song Nobody Else But You at the end expresses Goofy and Max finally reconnecting better than dialogue. The rising intensity of the music builds up through their acknowledgement of differences to their full reconciliation at the climax. As for the Powerline songs, I think Eye to Eye has the stronger start, though Standout reaches nice peaks. I'm very glad that this movie never feels like it's trying to waste my time, which is an odd concern, but with the state of a lot of Disney media, well, it's just refreshing to have screen time used so skillfully. Each scene progresses a previous character moment while sensically introducing new components that build up to the next. Things don't just happen in the movie, and as silly as the pieces can be, everything is grounded in what came before, which makes it beautiful to watch unfold when you see how it's working to weave each scene together. The opening nightmare conveys Max's primary motivation and fear, to receive the attention of his high school crush and to avoid becoming goofy like his father. The great comical sound effects for Max's transformation and having him fucking choke on the goofy laugh as it forces its way out of him help establish the film's mixture of comedy with the more grounded story beats. Then is Goof's introduction, where his entrance enacts the context of the relationship. By not knocking first, but then re-entering after, he's trying to respect Max's desire for privacy as he ages, but not doing very well at it. We get to see into their past communication style as Max leaves his clothes around despite having talked with his dad about cleaning up before. And Goofy not knowing Powerline allows Max to expound on the relevant pop star while also showing the distance between the two. And thinking because his son enjoys Powerline, he'll also like the mambo dance of a pop star from the era of Goofy's creation prefigures their division over the road trip, and Max's embarrassment follows from the nightmare. Though later, after getting his date, he does the same dance very publicly, meaning that despite his best efforts, he's more like his dad than he thinks. The point is not an in-depth exploration of each aspect of their relationship, but to lay these pieces down for later. After Today, the first musical number, confirms that Max's concerns over how he's perceived by peers as geek or goof are warranted. I mean, he practically repels them, and all of those concerns he associates with his father and against Powerline. Yet, one might say that it all
seems to be stuck in the 90s.
Well, it does represent the time period it was set in, but so does every other movie. The core of the film is timeless though, the reconnection between a father and son.
Heck, these nods to the times actually play into the world that our characters live in and the story that the film is trying to tell.
Okay, so is it bad or good that the film reflects its time? Because I agree every story should make the most of its context. Anyways, the song lays down small character pieces while setting the vibe of the day before summer vacation by playing on various high schooler stereotypes. And since so much in the movie introduces ideas before they're executed on, the song features everyone at the school except PJ, giving little bits of their personalities through smaller actions, while also grounding the stakes.
I'll either be famous
or you'll be suspended.
Some of them, like After Today and Nobody Else But You, can contain some not-so-great lyrics. Often, the wording during the song sounds so unnatural where you question if these are things that people unironically say in real life.
Yes, because people often rhyme and sing in everyday conversations. I think we might be missing the point of a musical here.
They could be just describing literally what's happening on screen.
So the complaint is that the songs are too relevant to the movie? And that's not even really true. Only the songs sung by characters are exactly related to their situation, which makes sense because that's what they would be thinking about. So, Stacy invites the entire school to a Powerline concert party that we see at the end. Then, as with many of the minor characters, like Bobby, Lester the Possum, or Bigfoot, we get just enough from Principal Mazer to not overstay the humor you can get out of his cartoony, exaggerated persona. Needless to say, Standout expresses what Max is attempting to achieve with his performance, getting the attention of Roxanne and to a lesser extent impressing his peers. Although, I'm really glad they included this epileptic seizure-inducing flashing light shot. After Mazer catches Max for the assembly hijacking, the principal delivers an impassioned warning to Goofy about the dangers of... hey Mazer, why is he wearing a Powerline costume dressed like a gang member? And what the hell is this punishment wall? Well, his tirade ties perfectly into the first scene with Pete, where he had just implied that because Goofy and Max didn't talk, his son could be running around with some gang or causing riots. Speaking of which, I think Goofy's second scene does much better at introducing him than the first, which centered primarily on Max. The scene does a lot through his department store photography job with Pete. Goof is shown to be great when interacting with younger children, hinting that his son's teenage years obviously created more challenges in terms of relating. We get the first inkling that Pete hates when Goofy's methods get better results than his, as he'll downplay any successes while asserting his own superiority and dishing out advice. Meanwhile, the scene hits you with a barrage of jokes all pulled from who the characters are and what they're discussing. For example, when a girl hides from Pete and he forcibly nabs her, Goofy shows his naivete.
Gosh, Pete, you sure are good with kids.
Oh yeah, but they love me.
While Pete slapping Velcro onto the girl to hold her still illustrates his strong-armed approach to parenting. Then, contrasting Max's inability to talk to Roxanne that morning, and running away with embarrassment when he yucks, after the popular response to the Powerline stunt, he's able to eventually ask her out when she approaches him. Despite the short interaction, their linguistic mirroring quickly convinces the audience of their chemistry. On a side note, in displaying Max's new reputation, all of the first 3 students to be pricks to Max during After Today come up to him after school to glaze him, which is amusing but also shows the caprice of the high school popularity Max wanted, as a comparison to the more honest and stable relationship he'll develop with Goofy, and to a minor extent Roxanne. Meanwhile, after just being told by the school principal that he needs to
Seriously, reevaluate the way you're raising your child.
seeing a toy display brings to Goofy's mind the road trip he took with his father, pushing him to follow Pete's advice to take Max on a vacation. So while Goofy cares a lot about his son and his future, he doesn't understand that the way he connected with his dad won't necessarily work with Max. Nor does he ever try to talk with Max about what happened at school.
He clearly can't accept that his son is growing up, and a different take on parenting is required for Max's teenage years.
True.
Goofy relies on nostalgic callbacks to Max's childhood to rekindle their family bond.
No. Goofy relies on what built the bond between himself and his dad, assuming what worked for them will also work with the son.
But this just reinforces Goofy's delusions.
Okay, what? Goofy is not delusional. He's not aware or responsive to his son's unenjoyment until after Max's blow-up at the Possum Park, genuinely not understanding the disconnection before. In the forest in the next scene, this thread continues on through Pete offering his under-your-thumb method, something else that Goofy quickly realizes doesn't work. The whole movie is Goofy adjusting his parenting according to each failure. At no point does he really double down besides at the junction, which shows that at that point he still fundamentally viewed the road trip as the remedy to his and Max's relationship issues, and not communication. Regardless, after Max's boom in popularity and newly acquired date with Roxanne at the party, it couldn't seem like a worse time for him to leave all that behind for a trip with his dad, who he doesn't really want to be around with in the first place. And thinking up to guilt trip Max into going, you can see that Goofy wears his emotions on his face, but the attempt obviously doesn't work on the older Max, so he's strong-armed into going. Forcing a stop at Roxanne's house, Max rushes to tell director Kevin Lima? to tell her that he can't go to the party. All seems well until Roxanne says she's sure she can find someone else. Now, I've read some negative discourse on some dirty web pages about Roxanne being willing to go with someone else, but I don't know, as much as Max and her seem to easily build rapport, they also practically just met, and we see another guy asking her out earlier. Wait, I know that guy, that's the dude who smooched Lisa by the bleachers, Chad. Then what the fuck, Lisa was just flirting with Max. To be fair, Lisa would throw her best friend under a bus for a chat with Chad, but god damn guys, some loyalty maybe? Well, whether Roxanne is actually going to find someone else or she's only saving face, the possibility prompts Max to throw out the brazen lie that he can't go to the party because Goofy's taking him to the actual concert. Then he works the lie up to waving to her from the stage, and on their way they go. I suppose it's the pair with Max leading the first song that Goofy leads his own in On the Open Road. I can't say I'm as much of a fan of this one, either musically or in terms of what it achieves. It's comparatively longer than After Today, which covered everything you needed to know about Max, while mostly serving the function of passing travel time before the first stop and setting the tone of the road trip. I guess there's some fun little cartoon characters that show up for the song, and most of them appear in the background of other scenes, but Though while singing, I do enjoy the one part where Max and Goofy talk over each other, making clear Goofy's unawareness of how his son's thinking about the trip. But an immediate reward with a good old looking at map almost crashing bit. Here, Goofy's true reasons for why Max can't hold the map hint at the underlying issues between them. Goofy's treating his son as younger than he is by saying it's a big responsibility, thus downplaying how Max is growing up, and by not wanting to ruin the surprise of their stop, he's placing what he did as a kid and wants to do now above something they would both find enjoyable. And you know, I'm a fan of the Possum Park. There's some good humorous bits. Although, man, you had to just immediately hit me with another song that stretches on way too long and doesn't move much forward.
Oh, man. My favorite is the Lester's Possum Park song.
That was so great.
No, you're wrong. Really, it's only between these two scenes that the movie ever feels stretched out, and only because everything around them is written so tightly do these stand out. But I will say that the Jamboree song starts building your irritation through the obnoxious audience, like the little girl yapping next to Max, or Goofy nudging him. Add to that an accosting mascot and his dad embarrassing him in front of a large group, and Max's outburst before they leave feels warranted. When the pair are surrounded by the crowd, the uncomfortable amount of laughing really helps shift the tone of the scene, demonstrating how the movie can deftly move from comedic to sincere when it needs to. That tone is maintained as the pair move on to camping, well, until Pete arrives. And you have to appreciate how in a few lines they can characterize Pete's father-son relationship.
Oh, yeah. I'm sure he's loafing around here somewhere.
After seeing his son's contempt for the trip the previous night, Goofy is considering backing off, but Pete suggests that Goofy follows his domineering parenting style and keep Max under his thumb. Testing Pete's advice, Goofy demands Max go fishing, and teaches him the perfect cast fishing technique that becomes very important later. Then accidentally nabs a previously mentioned dinner that Pete's cooking, to bring Bigfoot into the scene. Trapped together, the two are positioned to finally talk to each other, which allows some connection to form after the Possum Park low point. The sequence is very well knit together to move things along in a logical, albeit cartoonishly absurd manner. Weaving humor into the start of a scene that becomes very earnest provides some comic relief to occupy the awkward silence, though enough quiet is left in to aid the transition. Once forced to talk in the car, they're finally able to relate, over memory stirred by a canned alphabet soup that Goofy manages to cook for Max. There's a surprisingly significant amount of subtext in the sequence, using the animation and voice talent to the fullest to sufficiently portray the depth of this first connection.
There needs to be a lot of sensitivity in the end of this sequence. This is really the first point that Max and Goof have come together. Don't be afraid to be subtle.
Altogether, these were the 6 pieces of subtext I identified, and man, each one naturally evolves the scene and tells us exactly how the relationship is shifting through the interaction. Of my favorite moments are when Goofy stops himself from saying that Max used to spell out "I love you" with the soup letters.
And Goofy doesn't catch himself.
I love you.
And he realizes that maybe he's saying the wrong thing at the wrong moment. He and his kid aren't getting along very well right now. At the moment, they're sort of grappling with this whole sort of "I love you" thing.
And when they both start trying to talk at the same time, resulting in neither of them speaking. Goofy says, "You and I have to, talk, presumably?" While Max says, "Dad, listen, now that's a harder one. Is he thinking of telling Goofy about the concert lie?" Either way, both of them trying to resolve things leads to neither talking. Kept awake in the night, Max tries writing the truth to Roxanne, but stops at the thought that she not want to see him again. Frustrated, he accidentally kicks the map out of the glove box. As he decides to reinforce the lie by altering their route from the fishing lake to the concert, the Junction Lay motif plays.
Well, here you go, Navigator. Just
Associating this scene to the later one when he has the chance to change his mind. With the red glove box light, the pencil snapping, and his dad slowly waking, the filmmakers delivered a perfectly tense moment to express that this is a serious choice for Max. Upon ripping up and throwing away the letter to Roxanne, the words "I lied" remain on screen, having gained a further attestation to their truth. The next morning, a well-animated Bell reflection shot opens us to a diner, where Goofy misinterprets Max's preoccupation and glance towards the map, because he immediately gives his son the responsibility to choose their next stops. And by doing so, he helps to tremendously improve their relationship. He's finally letting Max do what he's interested in rather than what Goofy is.
I really like this moment where Max noticed that Goofy wasn't enjoying everything he wanted to do, so he takes him someplace that he'd actually be excited for.
Base take, and important for when Max sees his dad doesn't know what to do on the concert stage, so he uses something that he does understand. The montage takes up most of the remaining time on the road, split between their stops, car repair scenes where we see them starting to problem solve better together over the trip, and the map. What the fuck is going on with the map here? This shit changes significantly every time it's shown, including the color scheme. That's why I like to imagine the map's a constantly shifting Lovecraftian horror. It's single aim to drag Max and Goofy through the godforsaken state of Louisiana from, oh, Jesus, not Ohio. By that night, wait, what? Wikipedia, do you know how long a day is? You honestly want me to believe that in one day, they traveled from Arkansas, through Mississippi and Louisiana to Nevada, while stopping to jet ski, ride roller coasters, watch monster trucks, visit a ball of yarn, kill a mime, find the Batcave, catch a fowl, and change their car tire 3 times. Right. Besides, that kind of underplays the time and experience it took for them to build their relationship to the high it's at when they finally reached the Neptune Inn. And what a convenient time for old Petey to arrive to provide the crescendo of his character and lay down the major conflict. It's almost so hard to believe that this happens a second time that Pete stalking them seems more likely. In his previous scenes, Pete has established to hate when Goofy's methods work, which is paid off at the motel where he sees that Goof clearly has the better relationship with his son, so he sabotages it. I mean, do you see this guy? He's just fucking gleeful to overhear about the map change. At this point, the two are getting along, but still haven't fully talked to each other. This next obstacle presents a challenge that, once overcome, allows them to open up. So, playing up the smarm, Pete reveals what he found out. His conclusion being that Max is just a bad kid. Not believing Pete, Goofy leaves but stops to stand up for his son in the relationship. But he goes to the car anyway. And although he decides to trust his son, in an echo of when Max kicked the map out, so does Goofy. But even knowing his son lied to him, he doesn't confront Max, giving him a chance to change his mind at the junction. Or, honestly, more likely, as with the phone call from the principal, he does not want to confront Max about it. A great transition brings us from Goofy sleeping at the motel to then driving with the same expression, showing he has the exact same thing on his mind. The uncomfortable ride up to the junction between lake and concert, silent but for the humbug of the car, gives the scene all the gravity it needs. And although the dramatic music paints it as a fateful decision, the choice is really a false dichotomy. The real answer isn't either path, but what comes just after. In fact, had Max made the decision his dad wanted, who's to say that the argument through which their problems and concerns are aired would have happened at all? Once the decision's made, Goofy is positively pissed off, which is such a different angle to see him through. It's disconcerting, and Max attempts to cut the tension by mirroring the 20 questions game his dad tried to interest him with at the start. Instead, Goofy stops the car, and if the reason for his demeanor wasn't apparent to Max before, it certainly is now. He goes over to try to explain, but Goof refuses any conversation. Yet during this, the car runs down the canyon road, Goofy having forgotten to put it in park, which is justified by his angry forgetting to unbuckle.
Probably too stupid to understand anyway, right?
So Goofy's stonewalling, refusing to talk, refusing to listen, and he's getting defensive.
You locked it!
Criticism.
See, you ruin everything.
And then there's contempt, which is an attitude of superiority. These are 4 things that, if they go unchecked, means the relationship is in trouble.
Exactly. I enjoyed Cinema Therapy's coverage of the family dynamics in a Goofy movie, though, at least for this one, the filmmaker guy has little to say about the construction of the movie. The fast-tempoed chase music provides a strange backing to the father and son argument, although I do think it works. After the dramatic choral song for the junction and all of the uncomfortable quiet, we get their full argument leading to reconciliation while shifting to a far more lighthearted tone, which reminds us that this is very much a development of classical cartoon movies and plays on their tropes for the action. Above all, it doesn't seem to want us to take the argument too seriously. However, once they fall into the river, as they share what's actually been troubling them, so does the music's tone return to sincerity. With nobody else but you, Max sees his dad's vulnerability and makes the first move by breaking the silence as they drift on, their common history together allowing them to finally see eye to eye. Afterwards, though we cut through most of it, Max can fully explain himself, and Goofy is immediately supportive of him, even wanting to go to the Powerline concert when Max is over it by that point.
Dad, really, I think we should just, forget it.
Now, how come you always think I'm gonna lead you into some sort of calamity?
Dad?
What's wrong now? Look!
So good at giving a short bit of comic relief. Now, at first, I wasn't sure about the waterfall scene. It seems like a giant leap in stakes, though it does follow from their being trapped in the canyon that some dangerous situation would arise, and gives them an opportunity to prove that they really are always there for each other. Thus, the fishing pole, once serving as a disconnect between them and their aims, now exemplifies their newfound connection and shows that even back when they were camping, Max still listened to what his dad taught him. Moreover, the Powerline concert lie, once dividing them, becomes a way for the two to connect, and allows for Goofy to participate in his son's interests and Max to use his dad's interest in fishing to involve him with Powerline's performance. Thus, the concert becomes a climactic follow-through on their reconnection as something that can be shared between the two. When they return home and Max admits his lie to Roxanne, she says she already liked him because of his laugh. I mean, you didn't really hear him out when he couldn't go to the party until he brought up his dad knowing Powerline, so you couldn't have liked him that much. Again, that is unless she was only saving face. They make a deal to not lie anymore, sealing it with a kiss. No, that did not happen. There was no such agreement, fandom. Also, the Goofy laugh is a rather surface level thing to like, but it serves as an easily noticeable link between Max and his dad, who he once wanted to be completely different from and thinks Roxanne wouldn't like. When setting a new date, we see that Goofy's become a priority for Max now, as he postpones going out due to already having plans with his dad. If you thought YouTube analyses were overstuffed with summary, you should try sifting through these 90s reviews. Even calling many of these reviews in the first place is generous, as several seem like something a middle schooler with access to Wikipedia would have written, relying only on the most basic details. I might actually crash out if I have to read one more article stating that Goofy is a 63-year-old character. Expecting a kids movie, others look past all of the depth and skillful writing with glazed eyes, which becomes clear when you read what they have to say. Pete Rayner writes, "If you're going to make something called a goofy movie, why dampen the goofiness?" See, they tell on themselves. It's a bit too drippy with life lessons for tots. So when seeing it as for toddlers, a theme is called a life lesson. But I don't buy it. It's not the type of explicit life lessons you get with toddlers' television shows, but rather the implicit purpose with which any good story is written, and expressed naturally through its characters. After only 5 minutes of viewing, Bill Hoffman says, you'll see that Goofy movie looks slapped together with about as much care as a kid takes making mud pies at the beach. Now, that's just borderline slander. They never elaborate on what they mean either, so I'm left assuming we watch different movies. Instead of relying on the personalities of the Disney characters to drive their point home, the screenwriters load up on ill-placed 90s references to try to be hip. Genuinely, what do you mean? The relationship that Max and Goofy form completely relies on their decisions and the influence of characters around them, such as Pete or Roxanne, all built based on established motivations and personality traits. A 90s-esque pop star is prominent, yes, but do you think a teen like Max at the time might have an interest in such things?
It was important to me to make a movie that spoke to its time. I felt like, let's make a movie that is about contemporary teenagers.
And I've never had any problem relating to the movie because it's placed in a decade I didn't live through. It's obvious there wasn't a lot of care taken in making a Goofy movie. Right. On to the next one. Rob Blowing says, the father-son plot seems more indicative of Hollywood executives freaking out over their own parenting experiences than any awareness of their target audience. True! It was partly based on the experiences of ex-Disney executive Katzenberg.
I've heard Jeffrey Katzenberg was talking about going on a vacation with his daughter, and they weren't quite getting along, and he thought that might be an interesting subject matter.
But that denies the sincerity of any non-executive's creative vision or contribution.
I was really interested in telling the story of a father and a son, and how an experience that they go through brings them closer together.
Or the fact that there's push and pull from both sides with studio projects.
The whim of a studio executive can change a movie in a moment if you don't fight back against a bad idea.
But the idea that this isn't a relevant theme actually makes you seem out of touch. Father-son relationships can generate no interest in younger audiences? Really? You don't really get to decide the terms a movie wants to play on. Stephen Holden somehow got the impression that Lester's Possum Park was a rustic campground. More importantly, he says the film's too rambling and emotionally diffuse for the title character to come fully alive. As for the rambling, I think that's obviously not true. You'd have a hard time cutting any scene without losing a substantial piece of the relationship's development. Concerning diffusion, there's really only two modes that are played on, humor and sincerity, and the creators lean into one or the other as necessary. Is it emotionally diffuse because the father-son relationship we see has an emotional range, from embarrassed to nostalgic to sad or angry to enjoying each other's company? Relationships have significant range, so that part should be varying to some degree. If you had an examples, it would be easier to see what you mean by emotionally diffuse. It's strange that Rotten Tomatoes assigned a negative rating to Leslie Felperin's review, since it seems she left no definitive remark on quality. her primary criticisms being the cautious animation and that Powerline's outmoded musical style spoils the movie. Not his relevance to the story or anything, just the fact that he isn't a Snoop Dogg parody. Having seen only 2/3 of the movie because of a technical issue, Roger Ebert still decided to give a half-assed review. But he's actually wrong because he says he only got to the beginning of the road trip, which is closer to 1/3. Having later seen the rest, he wrote a short little nothing paragraph. How are these acceptable practices for critics of anything ever? At the very least, his was inoffensive. Todd McCarthy thinks a filming animator removes logic, which in some sense is true, as there are certainly many physical impossibilities. However, character physics and how the story develops are unequivocal. From the standpoint of the characters, all their decisions are rather logical for attaining their goals, as is the sequence of events. At best, some of the ways pieces are moved around can be clunky, but only rarely. For example, I would point towards Pete's convenient arrivals or the acceptance of Max and Goofy on the concert stage, which actually isn't even necessary for the story's progression. Further, while Bigfoot might be nonsensical, you could come up with any number of scenarios that would force Goof and Max to talk as he did. They simply gave us a funny one. By any reasonable reckoning, Goofy's distinctly overbearing and selfish, and responds with a bland dismissal to any opinion offered up by his son. Alright, let's explore this. Certainly Goofy dismisses his son's opinion when forcing the trip. The lack of communication at the start combines with Goofy's fear, so he decides to force the trip. That's not really a bland dismissal, but rather a, I love you, but I know what's best for you and we're not going to talk about it dismissal that is not uncommon among parents. Although you could say that going on the exact road trip that only he wants to is selfish. But the reason he chooses that trip is because it connected him with his dad, so he assumes it'll be the same with Max. When the trip starts, Goofy misreads his son's aloofness. But when Max very clearly yells the reason why at the possum park, Goof's quite hurt by it, and so cannot entirely be dismissing his son's opinions. When revealing how he's feeling to Pete, he says he's considering backing off, which again is not dismissal. Instead, he makes the mistake of listening to his friend's advice, though quickly learns it doesn't work. So he hands Max the map and lets him choose their stops. That's very obviously not a selfish dismissal. When Max lies, it does infuriate Goofy, but that doesn't last long either since they can finally get their thoughts out. While making many mistakes, in every story characters necessarily grow, so it's odd to try to portray Goofy as some heartless, selfish parent in the same vein as Pete.
I know you haven't been with anyone since your wife kicked the bucket.
While misunderstanding the premise, Peter Stack calls a Goofy movie an incoherent mess, which I feel I've adequately addressed in my coverage. He thinks the basic question is, how can you be cool and have Goofy for a dad? In asking such, he made a similar mistake elementary school me did when watching the first 30 minutes of the movie every indoor recess, and thinking that it's about Max and Roxanne, unless he means that that's the starting point from which Max develops. He goes on to comment that using 3 animation studios led to it seeming like different films spliced together. I don't get the same impression, and he gives no examples. I will say that the foreground and backgrounds can seem a bit disjointed at times, such as with the school office lobby, but even that's not very common. Lastly, Lewis Black, who follows the critic tagline in saying, what mental giant decided this was a Goofy story that needed to be made? See what I mean? It always comes back to, the story doesn't fit my expectations for Goofy as a character, so it's bad.
Some of my friends were angry with me for what I had done to Goofy. How dare I turn him into a character with emotions? Because he wasn't traditionally that character.
Apparently, you must always retread the exact same ground for characters to please these people. I have to say, without this movie, I doubt I would have any care for Goofy at all. The depth introduced by the filmmakers is what makes him interesting, for young audiences and old, and he can still be goofy at the same time. Trust me, that little me did not care that Goofy had emotions. He could still be funny. You ever get the feeling that you're alone in the world and no one will ever see it as you do, and you'll never escape the self-questioning involved with having a singular perspective? Well, fortunately that's not the case here. The film's reputation has improved over time, but I think going over all of these criticisms has made one thing abundantly obvious to me. Never trust what a critic says when they provide no support for their claims. Just because you're a career opinion giver doesn't mean your opinions are automatically valid when assessing media. I understand there were writing constraints for the newspaper reviews, but there's really no excuse for such purposeful misunderstanding. I'm honestly being generous even responding to many of these because they feel no compulsion to back up what they're saying about a Goofy movie's quality. And because I've assessed it according to the same criteria as the critics, I can confidently say they are wrong about the movie. And you know what? I have a feeling they wouldn't be much more fond of an extremely Goofy movie, even though it's far closer to their expectations of Goofy's depth and, well, goofiness.
You never think of your father. His dignity.
Fuck
dignity.
The prime example of why we don't need anything from Disney related to the Goofy movie canon is the sequel they pumped out half a decade after the original's release. If I were to judge an extremely Goofy movie as a standalone, I might be more fair to it. But as a sequel, it entirely fails to either live up to or properly continue the story. It desperately desires to recapture what the first did, up to paraphrasing entire lines, while making no attempt to tell such a story.
You're my son, Max. No matter how big you get, you'll always be my son. Might not be your little boy anymore, but I'll always be your son.
I honestly had a hard time even starting this movie, quitting multiple times before the first scene was done. I mean, immediately I'm hit with a time-wasting gaff sequence with Goof, a harsh reset on his relationship with Max, as if it's only degraded over the subsequent years since the first movie, and humor that just comes across as insulting to me.
On the bouteilles. Good, Hey, don't worry, bro. I'm a yellow bell.
Oh god, Bobby. What did they do to you, buddy? Like most of the side characters, he was exaggerated, but he seemed like someone who could exist. The degradation of the humor isn't just less funny, it hurts his entire presentation. Now he's a caricature.
You're all grown up and leaving for college.
My last night of babysitting and I'm a free man. Free, I tell you. Yahoo! Come on, son. I can't miss you if you won't leave.
What did you do to Pete? He was so much more subtle. And you realize Pete intentionally brought his son on vacation last time and constantly used him to get things done, right? His whole idea of parenting was keeping PJ under his thumb, and those types of parents don't stop once you're out of the house. In fact, he actively wanted PJ to spend time with him, even though he treats him poorly. Further, only at the beginning does PJ briefly mention his dad, whose authoritarian parenting was always on his mind throughout the first. So it seems they wanted to drop that trait rather than to use it as a starting point to develop off of. Goofy's misunderstanding of his son's interests is loosely brought up, and doesn't really lead anywhere except to foreshadow that Goofy will eventually neglect his own studies due to the consequences of the skateboarding he's warning Max about getting too involved in. To demonstrate the importance of concentration and follow-through on life's opportunities, he gives the example of tossing a horseshoe. The same thing that later inspires Goofy to lock in on his own studies. The term focus itself is thrown around a lot throughout, but doesn't add anything, more so serving as an explicit display that they didn't forget about that theme.
Focus more.
Focused.
Focus.
We're going for a message here, but its drab presentation and little importance for the overall plot and characters make it stand out as odd. The focus theme and the more interesting ones centered on finding one's own life after the nest is empty barely touch. At college, an angry outburst from Max leads to a distracted Goofy, who then must learn what he's teaching here. But neither theme receives very much attention because the movie is more focused on the stupid X Game plot than its characters. In contrast, everything about Powerline and the road trip plot significantly related to the father and son, their goals, and their relationships. Speaking of, the X Games is a grab bag of solo sports split into college teams that compete against one another. Even though the teams are all seemingly from the same college, the X Games is shown to be international. Until 2022, the real event was run by ESPN, which is featured more prominently in this movie than you'd expect, or hope for. So why do Max and his friends want to compete in the X Games? For popularity, of course.
We have a surefire way to shoot straight to the top of the freshman heap.
I thought a Goofy movie wanted to point out the fickleness of the high school popularity Max desired, and thought he had to reject everything like his dad to do so. But nope, we're back to that motivation. I'm not really sure why, of all Max's interests to develop, skateboarding was chosen, not like music or dancing which played into the first. Although I think Max's skateboarding was much more prominent in the Goof Troop series. The whole competition plot is so low stakes and irrelevant to the first movie, and not even remotely character driven. A Goofy movie features Powerline so prominently because he's very relevant to how Max wants to appear to his peers, and at first stands as a disconnect with his dad, whereas the skateboarding thing is just sort of something they all want to do. An easy comparison for a better execution of the college mixed sports game would be Monsters University. The competition is important for Sully and Mike's broader goals, and even features a villain fraternity, Roar Omega Roar. There's actually stakes for winning or losing besides the bet of being a towel boy for the winner.
If you win, I will let your entire team into the scare program. But if you lose, you will leave Monsters University.
Loser
of the finals will be Towboy to the other.
We're told and shown that Goofy's overbearing, which could follow as something unresolved in the father-son relationship from the first. But Goofy already knew and acknowledged years ago that Max was growing up, and he just wanted to be a part of his life. Besides, we don't get any sort of endearing scene between the two at the beginning that could have shown that the growth and understanding in the relationship had actually occurred. Except for a back and forth type fight similar to those of the first over a stuffed bear, after which Max picks it up to sleep with, which is a moment not even at the level of the relationship during the Hi Dad soup scene. Although, when we repeat the gifting of a family heirloom, this time a typewriter which is promptly forgotten about, Max, I believe, sincerely says,
Thanks, Dad. This means a lot to me.
And I do think that the scene of Goofy alone at the house hits hard, with him still cleaning up after Max and then having a moment with the bear. The scene doesn't overstay its welcome either.
Hey, Bob, who's driving?
Hey, what? You can't rehash the looking at map almost crashing bit? It's kind of amusingly ironic that Goofy works in this depressing toy factory, wherein his daydreaming about Max causes an explosion that best reveals the elevation of the slapstick from the first. The most comparable scene being when Goofy goes flying when the broken down car explodes. That movie kept conservative with the slapstick, and to a large extent involved Pete to really show him as a character acting as if he's there to just give friendly, helpful advice, while actually both being a negative influence and physically harming Goof. Which is humorous but also builds his personality. Different movie. The aspect of Goofy being distracted by a disruption in the relationship with his son is kept consistent later, once he returns to college to complete his studies after getting fired for the property damage at the factory. At the college campus, the three friends skate around, revealing this movie's favorite trick: characters silently moving around a set and achieving nothing for minutes to pad out the runtime. You couldn't have worked in some of their motivations for wanting to win the X Games? Perhaps PJ having a desire to achieve something due to his dad downplaying him throughout his childhood? The frat boy villain Brad's facial expressions are interestingly animated and eye-capturing.
Bradley is incredibly animated. He's bursting with spins and smears and squashes and stretches, to the extent that I watch him and think, man, why were these animators showing off so hard?
Although I wasn't getting much from him, because he's as one-dimensional as the protagonists. He wants Max on the Gammas, but not his friends, leading to the aforementioned Towel Boy bet. Once Max finds out his dad is going to the same school as him, he freaks out before talking to Goofy, who's at first not listening again. We're told Max sets 4 boundaries with him. No interfering with X Games practice, no hounding about schoolwork, no coming into his room unannounced, and no acting like a father. In quick succession, Goofy breaks all of the 4 ground rules they set. You know, all throughout the film, Max maintains a dismissive, asshole-ish tone when speaking about his dad, although there are several instances when he has a more sincere and empathetic approach. But I can't really blame him for being mad at Goofy, who is completely overbearing, to the point that Max has to trick and distract him just to go practice for the X Games. But that's even worse than the issue from the original. Goofy is not returning to bad habits, like lack of communication. He's flat out ignoring what his now older son says. Like, you couldn't do anything more with his character than set him back? Why is he so fucking clingy? Am I supposed to infer that it's from the day or so of having an empty nest? Seriously, what happened between the movies for this to make sense? Anyways, it's here that what I think of as the best story begins, when Goofy relates with the college librarian over common nostalgia for the 70s. I like that Sylvia basically asks Goofy on a date by filling out his sentences while he's asking her. The romance between them reaches the heights of the writing's sea-level bar. When Goofy dangerously disrupts Max's practice to tell him, he gets an invitation to play for the Gammas. While Goof declines, his son encourages him to join them, presumably because he thinks his dad'll hurt their chances. But at the qualifiers, because of the Gammas cheating, Goofy completely outshines Max, which he gets very upset over, such that he yells,
I'm not a little kid anymore. Now just leave me alone and get your own life.
Huh, that sounds familiar.
I'm not your little boy anymore, Dad. I've grown up! I've got my own life now!
We're attempting to reach the same heights as the car crash. Do you remember the car crash scene where Goofy and Max fucking bit it in the middle of the movie? We'll redo the line. We're attempting to reach the same heights as the car chase argument without any of the emotional build-up between them, good or bad. Yet, if that's Max's motivation, why, when Goofy had no intention of playing for any team after Max rejected him, would Max then encourage him to join the Gammas? The implicit reason given, of course, is that Max wants Goofy to mess up their team. But that's such an immature plan for even 14-year-old Max. Why are you upset about your dumb plan that plays on you underestimating your dad not working? Before it even got this far, how are you going to make me believe that Max can't clearly communicate to Goofy that he wants distance, and that Goofy would refuse to listen to him after the connection from the first movie? Then it takes 2 minutes of a psychedelic daydream to convey that his son's outburst affected Goof. The rejection leads to a failed exam and missing a date, so he seeks Pete for advice. Pete doesn't contribute anything except to grab a horseshoe, giving Goofy a realization about focus as a tie back to the introduction, which comes up again to stop Brad at the end. Right, the problem is your focus, and not the turmoil with your son. The horseshoe seems to be aiming for something similar as the fishing pole, but doesn't hold the same symbolic weight or meaning between characters. It's just some trick Goofy showed at the beginning without much relation to his son. Meanwhile, Max is considering transferring to a different school, but an inspirational speech from his friends is adequate for changing his mind. As they prepare for the semi-finals, Goofy warns Max about the Gammas cheating, but doesn't bother telling him that he quit the team.
Did Bradley tell you to say that? Stop wasting my time, Dad. I gotta stay focused.
Whether Max listens or not, though, it actually doesn't matter for the resolution. The Gammas cheat to remove PJ from the match, so then Max needs Goofy in order to compete in the final. Which, by the way, I love how at this 2 stops they have the exact number of vehicles needed for the surviving teammates, as if the losses for each team was predicted beforehand. Near the end, when Brad tries to cheat by activating the secret boosters on Max's skateboard, Goofy somehow handily has a horseshoe to stop him, while bringing up focus again during the throw. Not only would a horseshoe weigh you down during 3 racing sports in which aerodynamics are very important, but we never see him take one from his house, for example, so it appears out of nowhere in the story. But actually, none of that mattered, because the button is pressed anyway and the whole thing goes up in flames. Here presents Max's biggest growth, which is making the heroic decision to save the other team's player from literally burning to death. There's no reconciliation or forging a new bond. Goofy was useful to Max, so that fixes everything, as long as he fucks off and finds his own life at the end. And Sylvia's his girlfriend now too. We haven't even talked about the slam poetry Barrett girl who's... is that how you say Barrett? Beret? Whose only contribution through her lengthy screen time is sorta saving the 3 boys from the Gammas at the start, giving Max a little encouragement when considering transferring schools and dating PJ. To conclude this one, I'll say that an extremely goofy movie is a shallow shade of a sequel, insulting to the progress of the series' characters. So much time is wasted on absolutely nothing, the humor far more lowbrow and fewer interesting side characters like the ones that permeated the first, and who could simply interact with the world in their exaggerated but grounded ways to create funnies. The sequel has none of the vibrancy that the musical numbers gave the original, nor the efficiency or equivalent emotional depth, especially lacking in subtext. Don't get me wrong, there are emotional scenes, but there's little foundation for them. The dialogue comes across as so much more flat, and the characters as caricatures of themselves. As a plot, I think the X Games entirely fails to bring anything out of the protagonists. Any developments are short and forced upon the games or between them, not ingrained within them. You might think I'm being harsh, but for more modern sequels, people don't let Disney get away without criticism as easily when they don't give care and respect for what came before. They've been shoveling out shitty sequels for decades. They're only more of a public nuisance nowadays. But even with a lower budget, a tighter script, more prudence with the characters, and a stronger continuity with its predecessor would have gone a long way.
An extremely goofy movie is what I call a perfect film. And the core reasoning for that is that absolutely fucking none of it makes sense.
She openly admits to the glaring faults of the sequel, which I can respect, despite coming to entirely different conclusions as a result.
It's a very hodgepodge storyline.
Like, how is that not a bad thing? If a goofy movie seemed a misnomer for critics, then I'd have to say an extremely goofy movie lives up to its name, but I don't think that's a good thing. It's not difficult to read the second movie into Lewis Black's comment on how the original felt like a bland, barely television-length cartoon stretched out to fill a feature, and not much fun.
My dad went away when I was 11, and I didn't meet him again for 25 years. Absolutely no communication. So it was something that I really felt like I could explore in an emotional way. What is it like? to have a father? What is my dream of what a father and a son are? That you could actually go through great turmoil and still end up together. And I think I always had that sort of, that fantasy that that could come true. And I think I worked that out to a certain extent in this movie.